Hey folks, Luke here. Thanks for stopping by the channel. Today we're going to be talking about contracts. It's not really the most sexy part of being in business with comics and things like that, but it is certainly a necessary part to have. Most of you have probably entered an agreement with somebody and have gotten taken or left behind, and it's very important that you have a contract to protect yourself even when working with friends. So I've got a few tips, kind of points, things you're going to want to make sure that you're putting in your contracts. And then I'm going to go over a sample contract with you to show you basically what that looks like from a legal standpoint. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure that you stick around to the end, because I have a couple of special secrets on how I get a lot of this done without spending a lot of time that I want to share with you. So make sure you stay all the way to the end, okay? So without any further ado, let me go ahead and get started with some of these things that you're going to want to make sure that you're putting in there. The first one is you're going to make sure that you're setting up the scope of work and that you're clarifying that very detailed. You want to make sure that you're defining any special task or specific task, any deliverables that might need to be sent off, or time sensitive things, any responsibilities of the freelancer or the collaborator. This includes project's objectives, timelines, and any milestones that need to be met. The entire scope of the work needs to be clearly defined for the contract. Any ambiguity will just cause you trouble and waste time down the road. You want to make sure that you are setting payment terms. Clearly state the compensation structure, include the rate, the frequency of payment, if it's hourly by the project or installments, and any condition of payment such as invoicing procedures or late fees. Ownership of intellectual property rights. Specify whether the freelancer will retain ownership of their work or transfer the rights to the client upon completion. There are some cases where the work that the freelancer does, like, they want to keep, and you might think that no, they're not, the contractor's not keeping that, that's my work. Or you might think that I'm, as a freelancer, that I have rights to that work and you don't agree with that. So you want to make sure that all of that is being communicated right from the get-go here. Don't forget to include something about confidentiality or non-disclosure. You want to include these clauses that protect sensitive information and data being shared during the collaboration. This helps maintain confidentiality and ensures that proprietary information is not disclosed to third parties. It keeps anyone from ripping you off, basically. You want to make sure there's a termination clause that outlines the conditions under which either party can terminate the contract early and the consequences of termination. You also want to make sure that there's a revisions and edits clause. You need to clarify the process for revisions and how many rounds of revisions are included in the contract. That could include revisions for the work that you're doing, but it could also include how many revisions of the contract that we're going to go over as well, or if it can be edited at all in the future. You want to make sure that there's an indemnification and a liability section. Define the extent of each party's liability in case of damages or legal claims arising from the work or collaboration. Let's say you're doing something that is you're doing work for someone, or you're having work done that's a public domain character, but someone thinks that they have claims to that and they want to sue. In that situation, you may have to work that out. You're going to make sure that you have all those liabilities figured out in the contract beforehand, so you can't push it off on one another. It's already clearly defined. You're going to make sure that you have timelines and deadlines set. I know it can be scary to set deadlines sometimes because you don't know what's going to happen, but make sure that stuff is also clarified in the contract as well. So establish the preferred methods and or set the clear deadlines for deliverables, and establish a process for managing delays and extensions. You're going to make sure that's definitely in there. Communication and reporting. This is pretty much establishing how you will communicate, how often you're going to need to communicate, if there's a frequency at all to that. But you're going to make sure that you're saying, or either by mail, email, phone calls. Clarify all of that stuff, put it in writing. Also, you are going to establish a dispute resolution. You need to include a section detailing how any potential disputes will be resolved, whether through mediation, arbitration, or litigation. So those things are all important. And also where it's going to take place at. You want to make sure that the independent contractor status is clarified. So if you're clarifying that your freelancer or collaborator is an independent contractor and not an employee, that will avoid potential misclassification issues that may arise from the work that you're doing or having done. You want to make sure that you also have some insurance or liability coverage, or at least a clause for that if necessary. So sometimes there may be cases where you're just assuming that they're insured, like their house, their car, things like that, anything that might affect delivery or the work that you're doing. You're also going to make sure that you have some miscellaneous clauses in there, anything that might be relevant, things that are kind of outside of the norm. Make sure all of that stuff is defined, put that in your miscellaneous section, and then you want to have someone from legal review this thing. It's really important that you're not just writing this contract and letting it go, because there may be portions of it or something in there that is missed, and there may be legal precedent by which someone can get out of that contract or it's void. So having someone that's in legal take a look over it is pretty important. Now, it's also very possible to find someone local. There's business attorneys pretty much everywhere, and even if you're in a small town, you'll be able to find someone good. Lord knows I have. So now let's take a look at a sample contract. Okay, so let's take a look at this sample contract. This is basically between a contractor and a client, myself and John Doe. And you may be reversed in here, but defining the parties is pretty important. Normally, the first section that you're going to run across is the background. This is going to express that the client believes that the contractor is qualified and that the contractor agrees to do the work that he's being hired for. Here is where we start to define the contract, the scope of work, the services being provided, and the overall part of the agreement. This is broke down into different headers just for convenience sake on this contract. So it does go over the services provided, so what I am going to be providing to the client, and any other task. We left this one pretty open just in case there are more pages needed or other work that I needed to provide. I know the person really well, and so I'm pretty happy with doing a little extra if needed. It's not a big deal for me. So I made sure to leave that quite open. Here's where we are setting the terms of the agreement. Are pretty simple. We're defining what the terms are first and foremost. We also, in this section, we set the agreement to terminate. You might remember that. Here's the performance. The parties agree to do everything necessary to ensure that the terms of the agreement take effect. So we're just saying that we're going to do everything that we can to do it. Next, we are defining our currency that we're using and how the compensation is going to work. Pretty important to do that. This was a while ago, and I was doing some work on a discount for this person. So you'll see that those numbers are a little bit lower. And sometimes you're going to do work that is a little lower just because you want to. You like the job and you want to work in their budget, so you do. Here's where you define that. That way I can't come back later when I do these pages and say, well, that wasn't enough money, I need more. It is clear and done right here. It's already defined. We set that we're going to be doing it by invoicing. It's going to get paid in this way, within this many days, and all of that information is covered here in the compensation. Reimbursement of expenses. This one is kind of tricky. I don't usually use this, but sometimes there might be an occasion where something has to be purchased that's specific to the job that I wouldn't otherwise have on hand. And in that case, upon approval of the client, I will invoice them for that thing. That way I can get the job finished. So It's very rare. Sometimes it's a piece of software. In that case, if it's software I'm going to keep, we may cut that down to like 50% or something like that. But we work that out. But we put a clause in there just so that we have it, and there's that expectation that if there is a need, then there will be a conversation about it. Now we include the confidentiality agreement. This is that NDA that's so vitally important to have. We just cover all of the ins and outs of that and how no one's going to divulge any secret information. It's why I do so much work that I can't share with anyone until the client decides that they want to release that. But this keeps me from sharing anything that I'm not allowed to, that they don't want me to. Pretty clear cut on that. And then we go into ownership of the property. This will define who owns what and what proportion of ownership there is going to be for any intellectual property. Let's say if I design a character or I help with some of the story element, we can work out beforehand if we're going to do that, if there's going to be any ownership at all. For most cases, it's not. I completely turn over everything to the client. Even when I do a character design, I don't take any ownership of that as well. I get my compensation and hopefully it goes well. I do like to put into that contract that I will be recognized as the character designer, and that if anything does come from that character long term, anything big, that I will be able to potentially receive some compensation for that in the future. Let's say it gets big and they make movies of it, and there's toys in my designs running everywhere, and all I've made is $175. I don't think I would be real scrappy about that. So we kind of put in a clause that we're able to maybe include some licensing ownership if that property is ever licensed. So sometimes you'll put that in there, but you want to make sure you're including, depending on the scope of the work, those kind of things in there. This job, none of that applies. Return of property, this is pretty simple. This just says that once this contract is done, anything that could potentially have information that the client doesn't want shared is returned, and that any property, physical property of theirs, whether it be pages in the agreement or whatever, are sent off. Remember, I had mentioned that we wanted to make sure that we clearly identified the independent contractor status. So be sure this is where that's at. We put that in the capacity / independent contractor section. It just very clearly qualifies that I am the independent contractor. I'm not an employee at all. And that is an important section because that keeps you from being miscategorized. I also put in a clause about right of substitution. In the event that I may need some help along the way to speed the project up, this gives me the right to do so, to hire out some things. Not anything that will affect the real look or feel of the job, but if I want someone to do thumbnails for me, that allows me to kind of hire that out, subcontract that out. If I'm supposed to be providing full pages, inks, letters, colors, then allows me to send off and get that work done by a subcontractor, of whom I would make sure the client approves of. And then we also put in the contract that that subcontractor is a subcontractor of mine and not the client. So they're working for me and not John Doe. The autonomy is saying that I have full control over my work schedule and nobody else. So this client can't come back and say, it's Tuesday at 10 a.m. and you're not at the office. It doesn't matter if I'm at the office or not. I control my work schedule and when and how I get the work done. It's all a matter of just providing the work in the agreed amount of time. This equipment section is very important to have. This is not the same as reimbursement stuff that is going to be specific to a campaign or to a client. This is more general stuff. This is my scanner, my laptop, my my drawing tablet, my pencils, my pens, my inks, anything that I need to do the job, I'm responsible for. It's just saying that I can't come back to the client if one of these things breaks and try to get money from them. It's going to be up to me to make sure it gets fixed so that I can fulfill my end of the contract. I always include a no exclusivity clause just so that I can say that, look, I'm not exclusive to you. If jobs come along as I'm working on this, as long as I am meeting reasonable deadlines, then I can also take on work for other people, that I am not just your artist or your editor or your writer. I am also other people's, and this is also great for the writer, so it doesn't make me think that he can only, or they can only use me as their artist. They're allowed to use other people, so it's goes both ways there. This next section, this talks about the notice. This is how we communicate with one another and how we intend to communicate and the frequency of communication. Indemnification is also important here. This is what we're liable for and who's responsible, especially in the case of litigation. It's always important to put in that kind of clause. If this client gets sued because something is a little bit too much like another story or whatever, someone doesn't like it, then this defines who's responsible for each section, if at all. And in most cases, I try to remove myself from any liability when there could be potential litigation over someone's property. I'm just doing a work for hire in this case, and so you're going to make sure that you have that. If there's going to be anything, if you hire a freelancer and to design your character, and someone says, well, that design looks just like mine, it was swiped, you're going to make sure that maybe there's something in that clause that says, if I think you swiped it, then you're going to be responsible if we get sued and not me. So you might want to put that in there as well. Here is where we talk about the modification, any kind of amendments or anything, the editing process. I like the time is of the essence section, which is basically saying that we are trying to get this done and that we don't intend to have a waiver or anything with this. It is maybe not necessary to have that, but it is nice to have that in there so that we can say that our expectations is that we each work at a reasonable pace. The assignment is pretty simple as well. You may not think that you need it, but my lawyers advise that we have it. So the contractor will not voluntarily or by operation of law assign or otherwise transfer its obligations to anyone else unless it's been written by prior agreement. So let's say I'm having trouble getting the work done and the client says, I want to not do that. Someone else is going to be able to do the work at the same price. I want them to do that work. Then we have to talk about breaking the contract. There's also an opportunity in which where I would be unable to do the work and have to transfer that work off to someone else. And so this is saying that won't happen unless there's prior written consent. These next few sections are pretty simple and a lot of times overlooked. This just says that the entire agreement is the agreement, that there's no other clauses or anything else out there that might affect this contract or keep this contract from being solid. The interment section, this just qualifies that even in the event of death or inability to perform the contract, that our heirs and our executors will make good by the other person, whether it be in refund or making sure that all of the property that is owed gets delivered. We also have a section that covers the titles and headings, and this is just to say that they're only set up for convenience. They're not supposed to be considered when trying to interpret the agreement, that they're only there for convenience sake. And then oddly enough, we have to include gender in our contracts now. There are cases where genders may swap or people may identify as something else. And in those cases, if you use any gender-specific terminology, there's precedent where people have tried to back out of a contract or avoid a contract for that. This is simply saying that whether we're using singular or plural language, that they are one and the same for us, and whether they are feminine or masculine verbiage, that they are one and the same. So it's saying that it does not matter about those things. It is just between this person and that person. And when we use those words, they're all completely interchangeable. Then you have the governing law. This is where we talked about where litigation will take place. If anyone wants to sue me, they have to come and sue me in the state of Indiana. And if I sue anyone, they have to come here to fight their case. The severability section is another one that people kind of overlook. This is just saying that if there's anything that we find to be unenforceable in the contract, that it doesn't void the whole contract, that it only voids that section, and every other section that is enforceable remains intact. And now finally we have the waiver. This is to say that if either party runs into any kind of fault, like default, delays, or omissions, that it's not a waiver of the contract or a breach or any subsequent breach. It's saying that we're going to work through those things, that breaches, that delays are not going to count as a breach, because delays sometimes happen. And then you want to make sure that it's witnessed. Now, I mentioned before that I had a secret for you at the end, and here it is, folks. A paralegal that I worked with in the past informed me that there's a very simple website that you can go to called lawdepot.com, and you can actually get a subscription to Law Depot, and here you can create any kind of contract that you want. This saves you valuable time working with a lawyer. If you can pre-make your contract and then send it to your lawyer, it saves so much time and so much money. So I am not sponsored by Law Depot at all, but I do suggest that you go and you get a subscription there. Not only do I suggest you get a subscription to Law Depot to do all of your contracts, but I also suggest you go to a place called DocuSign. DocuSign, it's DOCU, like docu, SIGN, DocuSign.com. And that is where we sign all of our contracts. It is free in most cases, and then there are different paid versions. I have a much higher paid version than most people because I do a lot of contracts. I think the only other higher paid version is the one for realtors, because they do contracts every day like that. So lawdepot.com, here you can create the contracts. This contract was created through lawdepot.com. They have a very cool method of being able to edit it through like a worksheet. So let's say we have a partnership agreement. We'd already talked about this is a work for hire. Let's talk about a partnership agreement. We're working in the entertainment and recreation industry, and so we can just go through like this. I have to be very careful because I do have partners that are already in this, but you can go through the business and where it's from, so you can set that up. The business information will skip partners, but you can go to how it's managed, put your partner's information in, when the meetings are, who can request the meeting. Then you go into the accounting, who's responsible for that and how that will work. Then you have final details, which will include anything that goes into arbitration, all of that stuff. You get to your print and download, and you can even go to edit that section and make some things different if you want, or you can just send that off to your lawyer, get approval, and then stick that right in DocuSign and send that off to your people so that you can get all this stuff signed up. So there you go. I told you I was going to give you a super special secret at the end. So if you want to know how Luke manages contract after contract after contract, it's through lawdepot.com. Everything is made through there, and then it's sent off to my lawyer for approval, and once they agree on it, then it is golden. The only thing that we didn't do through there is the website terms of service, which you can do that through Law Depot, there's every kind of contract that you can think of in there that has a template for you to go through the worksheet to get it together, to make it happen. So you don't have to be real wise on all the legal language. It's already in there in kind of a form letter type format to help you out. So I do greatly suggest that you use lawdepot.com. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you stopping by today. Again, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If this content has been helpful for you, please let me know. Leave a comment about what was most interesting to you. Did I miss something that you guys think that I should include? Or was this not even useful for you at all? If it wasn't, then also let me know. I'd appreciate that. That way I don't waste my time on videos like this. But I do hope to have more information coming out to you very soon. Each week I want to have some kind of detailed tips and tricks to help you out to navigate this stuff. This is kind of nuts and bolts. So thank you again for being here. Remember, leave the woodpile higher than you found it, and be careful out there.